Good morning and welcome to today's SC Launch and Learn with Matt Vaadi, CEO of ERG Payroll. Today we are discussing HR for startups. Before we begin, I'd like to go over two housekeeping items. First of all, if you can hear me, please raise your hand in the webinar controls. All right, Keith, thank you very much. Jason, Karen, thank you for joining us, and glad to know that y'all can hear me. Y'all can go ahead and lower your hands. Secondly, on the format for today's webinar, just to let you know, we will keep all of the audio muted for the audience. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the webinar controls at any time. But about 20 minutes in, we're going to pause for some Q&A, and then we'll handle Q&A at the end of this session as well. The format will be, I'll be reading the questions out loud, and then Matt will be answering them. My name is Julia Linton, and I serve as the Operations Manager for SC Launch. Thank you for joining us. So now I would like to welcome our speaker, Matt, to the webinar studios. Matt shares a unique perspective from having not only started two companies, from the ground up, but also consulting with thousands of businesses from startups to Fortune 100 companies. Matt is the CEO of ERG Payroll and HR, which is an HR technology firm, and also Guru, which is an HR software firm here in Columbia, South Carolina. Now he's leading his own team to explosive growth at ERG as well as Guru. In addition to being CEO and entrepreneur, I just want to brag on Matt for a minute. He is also a published author. His new book is called Ping Pong is Not a Strategy, How to Create an Awesome Organizational Culture. And his book is available on Amazon. I'm really excited for that. So Matt, I'd like to welcome you here, and I'd like to hand the mic over to you. Welcome.
Thanks, Julia. I appreciate it. I hope everybody's doing awesome this morning, and I'm excited to talk to you all this morning about some HR strategies and tactics as it relates to, early stage businesses. But some of these are things that it doesn't really matter where you're currently at. They're just the common mistakes that we see small businesses, particularly when getting started, making, and also some of the strategies that you can start to implement in the early stages that are going to pay huge dividends in the long run. But before we get into that, I just want to make sure everybody's in the right mindset here. So back in the 90s in Japan, they conducted a study where 13 people who were extremely allergic to poison ivy were rubbed on one arm with a harmless placebo and told it was poison ivy, and they were rubbed on the other arm with poison ivy and told it was a harmless placebo. On the arm that was rubbed with a harmless placebo, but were told it was poison ivy, 13 out of 13 people had an allergic reaction after being told that the harmless placebo was in fact poison ivy. I share that because mindset matters so much when it comes to starting a business and how we're going to grow the human resources function inside of that organization. Our culture, our beliefs, who we are, and how that helps us to attract, engage, and retain top talent are going to be paramount to the long-term success of the organization. And I see that manifest with companies all the time. We had a client several months back. He shared with me, Matt, we're just not able to get top talent because we're in this small leased space, and because, we don't have the money to pay top dollar, and we don't have this, and we don't have that. His mindset was completely off. While the challenges are unique and different for those of us that are starting businesses, they are not things that others have not overcome before us and that we cannot overcome ourselves. So make sure you get your mindset right. And as we get prepared here today to walk through some of the things that we can do to create sustainable long-term HR practices. So I won't share much about me. Julia already kind of hit on it. The only thing I will hit on really here outside of being a pizza enthusiast is that I put family man on top here for a lot of reasons, because it is, besides my faith, it is what's most important to me. But I put that because oftentimes founders believe that you can't have work-life balance. You've got to be at the office all night and you've got to lead by example. I continuously run out the door at 5 p.m. and let my team know that I'll be running out the door at 5 p.m. because I have limited time in the evenings with my young children. and I'm going to take advantage of that time. And does that mean that I might have to boot up the laptop after everybody goes to bed? Does that mean that I'm going to have to put in hours on the weekend? Absolutely. Starting businesses is definitely a grind. It takes time, but you can still create that balance in your life by setting those expectations up front. So definitely something I wanted to highlight and let folks know that it can be done. Yeah, like Julia mentioned, check out the book. A lot of what we're going to cover here goes into way more detail in the book. It's available on Amazon. Ping Pong is not a strategy, or just Google me and it'll pop right up. My name's easy to spell, Vaadi, V-A-A-D-I. And for those of you on the line, connect with me on LinkedIn. That's Matt Vaadi, V-A-A-D-I. I'd love to connect with all of you. So here's what we're going to walk through today. So we're going to talk about really what are the three most important things that I see. And to me, I look at high performing organizations that have great cultures and continue to grow. Those are the things that are important to me in a business. Awesome culture, growth, both of my people and my company. And so what do they all have in common? Well, they all hire really well and they have great processes around hiring. They have great education and training programs, and they manage the performance of their number one asset really well. So I'm going to touch on each of these items in a little bit more detail. And once again, we're going to dive down into the weeds on some of this stuff, get super tactical. Other stuff, we're going to keep it up more at a high level. If you need further resources, don't hesitate to drop me a note when this is over. Hopefully my email is out there somewhere. I just realized I usually have it on that prior slide. It wasn't on there, but it's just matt@ergpayroll.com. We've got tons of articles, guides, videos, et cetera, that if I didn't hit something in enough detail here for you, I can probably share something that'll help. So don't hesitate to reach out. All right. So first of all, why is it so important to hire really well? Well, hiring, besides the obvious fact of the makeup of your team, is going to be going to have a direct correlation to the success of your organization. It also costs a ton of money to replace individuals when you make a bad hire. So there is data out there that suggests it's up to 2 to 3 times an employee's average annual or their annual salary to replace them. That sounds a little ludicrous to me. You know, there are some that it's as low as $5,000. But the number that always makes the most sense to me of all the data I've looked at is about $25,000 on average cost to replace an employee. If you think about the amount of time it takes you to train the new hire, the amount of time and effort that goes into, you know, interviewing, screening, reference checking, once again, training them up, the cost of your teammates taking time out of their day to train the individual. Sometimes you think 25,000 is really on the low end. And once again, it's based on the employee's salary, what their role is, all that stuff. But either way, super expensive. Not many of us out there are willing to cut a check for $25,000 just to replace an employee. So definitely important that we hire well and we hire right. Next up, I think about the engagement levels of employees. So 70% of employees, and this number, it almost never changes in these polls. Every single year, about 30% of employees are actively engaged. And now that'll range from 29 to 32% over the last 10 years on average. And so that number never changes. What's really critical to understand and start to wrap your mind around is that top 30%, those people that are engaged, are outperforming your other employees by 200%. So let me say that again. The engaged employees, the top 30%, and if any of you that have ever worked on a large team, you can visually see this. If you put 10 people at a conference table, you can see the 3 people that are engaged. They showed up ready to go. They're prepared for the meeting. They've gotten notes. They're getting ready. They want to start on time. You know, the other people in the middle are just kind of, you know, we're here. We're going to get our job done. We got it going. And then there's people on the other end of the table checking LinkedIn for a job. So those folks, those top 3 are going to outperform everybody else by 200%. So we want to focus on not only hiring great people, but how we keep them engaged along the way. So super important. Let's dive into hiring in a little bit more detail here. First mistake I see tons of startups make is they are given some really bad advice. Honestly, this is advice that swims around startup communities that, oh, you should just make your first employees contractors. That way you don't have to pay taxes and you don't have to deal with setting up payroll and, you know, it'll save you money, all that stuff. None of those factors have anything to do with whether somebody should be classified as an employee or a contractor. And quite frankly, it's going to create a lot of headaches for you down the road if you improperly classify somebody. Not only are you going to owe back wages, back taxes, you're going to owe penalties and failure to file penalties on those taxes and failure to file penalties. So do it right from the start and make sure that you're looking at this from the proper perspective. The very simple thing I tell people when it comes to determining if somebody is an employee or a contractor, think about a construction site. On a construction job, there's a general contractor who is over the entire job. They hire subcontractors underneath them. Think of yourself as the general contractor and the subcontractor as the worker in trying to determine this. Are they somebody who comes to you fully trained? They're an expert at what they do, like the plumber who's going to do all the plumbing work on that large job site. They're going to show up. You're going to tell them what time to be there. You're going to tell them when the project should be done. You're going to give them some rules of the job site, but they're going to bid a lump amount. They're going to bid $500,000 to do all the plumbing work on that project. And then they're going to get it done on the timeline that's laid out to them. Now, a contractor, if I'm hiring somebody internally, could be somebody just like that, where I go, okay, you are a search engine you're a website designer. I hire you to design my website. It's going to cost $5,000 and you're going to have it done by XYZ date. And here are the expectations. And you're going to work independently to go get that done. We've agreed upon all the expenses. The financial control is on you as long as it costs me that $5,000 at the end of the day. These three bullets right here are the three things that the IRS looks at. And the Department of Labor, they want to know who has behavioral control. So who controls how and when that person does their job. So think about if you're training somebody and you're training them the ways of ERG, you're training them, about your core values and your mission, like they are definitely an employee. They're not going to be a contractor. Contractor is an independent entity that has nothing to do with your mission and core values, et cetera. Financial control are the business aspects of the worker's job controlled by you or them. And so once again, if I'm that plumber, I control all the financial things outside of you stroking me a check to get the job done. And then the relationship, are there written contracts or employee type benefits? If you're offering a vacation plan or a PTO plan, they're an employee. They're not a contractor. But where folks go sideways on this a little bit is forgetting that it's not that you're going to you're unlikely, although it's possible, to get a DOL audit or a IRS audit tomorrow that everybody comes through and looks at whether or not these people are employee or contractors. But what does happen to startups is your teammate goes to file their taxes at the end of the year, and it was not properly communicated to them that you had signed them up as a contractor to work for you, and you haven't been paying their employer portion of the taxes, so they owe self-employment tax at year end, and they go, oh, what the heck? Like, I didn't know I was going to owe all these taxes. I haven't been putting any money aside. So what would the worker say? Do they know they're a contractor? Do they know they're a specialist? And this is a side note. I don't have a slide in here on this. If you're a startup, the percentage chance of an intern being able to not get paid is incredibly low. So I also hear that going around all the time in the startup community. That's that, hey, we're going to just get a bunch of free interns to do the work for us. And so that is, once again, probably less than 5% chance that as a startup, you're going to have the infrastructure to validate that you have a training environment that's going to be purely beneficial to that intern, and they're not going to be doing real work for you. So a little bit off topic, but on topic, another common thing we see. So make sure you classify them properly up front so you don't have penalties down the road. Next up for this, when we're looking at hiring, we want to determine, are they exempt or not exempt? Some people know this as salaried versus hourly. Those two don't make one exempt or non-exempt. Exempt means you're exempt from minimum wage and overtime. It was put in place by the Fair Labor Standards Act back in 1938. There are a couple different things that go into that. It's the salary, first and foremost, of the individual. Do they make at least $684 a week, which comes out to about $35,000 a year or more? And are the duties of the role qualifying under one of the 5 categories of exemptions as outlined by the FLSA? And one of the things I'm going to do as we walk away from this, Julia shared the list of attendees with me. I'm going to send out an email after this with a link to a Dropbox that has a checklist that'll walk you through this. So I'm not going to go too down in the weeds because there's so many different circumstances that come into exempt versus non-exempt. But once again, what usually happens is you get super overwhelmed starting your business. You need some administrative support. It's one of the first hires a lot of people make. I'm spending too much time with the administrative stuff. I'm going to hire Josie and I'm going to pay her $35,000 a year to do all these different things. And does her role actually qualify as a exempt position under the FLSA's duties checklist? Typically not. There is an administrative exemption, but the caveat to that is they have to be able to make decisions on matters of significance, which oftentimes somebody in like a purely administrative role would not be doing. And what you have to bring yourself back to is, once again, what would this worker say if somebody asked them? Because once again, you're probably not going to get, there is a chance you will get audited, but what typically happens is Josie says, man, I'm working 60 hours a week for $35,000 a year and I'm not getting any overtime. Man, I'm getting hosed here. What's the deal? Should I even be exempt or should I be non-exempt hourly and getting paid overtime for all these hours? And then that's who goes to the Department of Labor, not the Department of Labor just showing up at your door randomly. So definitely something to consider is, what is the intent of trying to make this individual exempt? If you're just trying to save on overtime and trying to drive down labor costs, that is the wrong intent. They have to fit that salary and duties qualifications. So something to look out for. Let's hit on some hiring best practices. This is something that's near and dear to my heart. I've hired over 1,000 people in my career. I've got open jobs right now. I can attest to the things that I've got here. First and foremost, that is have a process for hiring. There is a million different processes. And when I say processes, I mean have an interview process that you're going to follow, that somebody has to make it through before you're going to offer them a job. So for example, here at our company, we're going to do a phone screen. We're going to do a skills-based interview where we talk about the skills that the person has and are they in relation to the expectations of the role. Then we're going to do a behavioral interview to make sure that person aligns with our core values and the expectations that we have of how you're going to act and perform inside of our organization. Then we're going to check references. Then we're going to make an offer if it makes sense. I cannot tell you how many times I've sat down with somebody for that first in-person interview and thought on the spot, I want to make them an offer. I've got this job open. All the work falls back on me and the rest of the team whenever that job's not filled. I just need to get this person in place. They seem great. Let's do it. They come in for the next interview and I go, man, all right, this is starting to fall apart pretty quickly. Maybe they're not quite as good as I thought. Maybe they're not quite as interested as I thought, and vice versa. So we always say even a donkey can act like a thoroughbred for 3 interviews. Make sure you take your time, go through a process, and hire slow. You will be much better suited to have a position open longer than making a bad hire. So even if you have to sit on an opening for a couple of months and people have to pick up the work, they would rather pick up that work and help out the team than have a terrible person who they're having to go back and do their work over them because they cannot perform the role at a high level or they don't fit in with the culture and they're cancerous to the team. So hire slow. And finally, always be recruiting. So this is something, we are in one of the tightest labor markets in history. This is a question, even before you have a hiring need, you should be asking anybody who is familiar with your organization, who are the most talented people you know that I should consider hiring? You want to be filling out a bench. You want to have people available that you've had initial conversations with, phone screens, coffee, whatever it might be, so that when the opening comes up, you're able to go to that Rolodex and say, okay, hey, here are a couple people that I talked to in the past that might be a good fit for this. Keep a spreadsheet, use an applicant tracking system, do whatever you've got to do, but start to build out that bench strength before you need it. And it makes you much more viable when the time comes to fill that role because you've got options and people that know you and you know them that are ready to go. All right, so now let's take a quick shift. We're staying on hiring, but we're going to talk about some of the documentation. And this is, man, if I can't remember the last time we brought on a small business that was, less than 5 years old that had proper employee files. And I will tell you that when I look at this list of documents that you are required to gather from a new hire and the amount of penalties and fines and potential tax assessments that could come along with improperly doing this, it creates a tremendous amount of liability for a small business that cannot afford to have this amount of liability on the books. So don't overlook this stuff. Don't run past it. Don't do it half-assed, because it is super important. Once again, if that day comes and the audit shows up, you're looking at the I-9s alone up to $1,100 a penalty, up to $1,100 each in penalties for each one that you're improperly storing and or they're not completed properly. So definitely a lot of potential liability here. So what are you required to do? So you need a W-4, it's a personal tax form for the individual. What are you to withhold from their check? As of January 1st, 2020, we now have a state South Carolina W-4 and a federal W-4. They have gotten a good bit more complicated. It's almost like you're doing TurboTax before the taxes start coming out of your check, which in the short term is kind of a pain for employees. In the long term is going to make for much more accurate year-end returns and much less loaning your money to the government for the course of a year. The I-9, once again, of all the forms on this list right here that you want to pay the most attention to and you want to make sure you're properly completing, submitting, and storing, it is the I-9. Once again, I will send a checklist along in that Dropbox that tells you the storage requirements for these forms, but the short is I-9s need to be complete by both the employee and the employer within 3 days of hire. And you have to view their IDs. This form is basically to validate whether or not they're legal to work in the United States. And you have to store that information separately from everything else under lock and key. So your I-9 should be in a binder or in a folder by themselves in a drawer that is not accessible by the bulk of your teammates, only by your leadership personnel. The Affordable Care Act has a notice that you need an employee to sign off on. You can Google that, find it pretty quickly. We'll throw it in the Dropbox as well. Terms of employment are required by the Department of Labor. If you Google Department of Labor terms of employment, you will find a form. If you don't have one, if you're not putting together an offer letter, usually this can be supplemented by an offer letter. But this just outlines some of those basic things like you'd have in an offer letter: what the job is, what you're getting paid, what the hours of operation are. The Department of Labor wants us to share that with an employee so that we have good communication right from the jump. COBRA, if you are offering health benefits, even if you have less than 20 employees, you still have state COBRA notification that you have to give to your new hires. And then at will, in South Carolina, it is an at-will right-to-work state. We need to provide an at-will notice to our employees. Now, one quick note on that, at-will, people talk about this all the time. We get more calls of, hey, I want to fire Joe tomorrow. Well, why do you want to fire Joe? He just doesn't fit in. He's not great. He's whatever. Well, let's talk through that situation. Matt, it's a right-to-work state. It's an at-will state. I don't need to worry about it. Let's just fire him and be done with this. I don't want to keep him around. Thing I'll tell people all the time, first of all, nobody should ever be surprised when they get fired. So you should have some form of disciplinary conversations leading up to that. But secondarily, not only is it a right to work state, it's also a right to sue state. So anybody who leaves your organization who's been terminated and feels like they were discriminated against, fired for any reason other than job performance, has the opportunity to come back and sue you as well. And whether or not they have a case, if somebody's willing to take it, they're going to tie you up in court for a while. So creating a paper trail along terminations is not something I've got in this deck, but definitely a best practice you need to do and consider. And we've got some great videos out on YouTube about termination best practices as well. So just put ERG Payroll into YouTube and you'll find tons of great HR videos. All right, so in addition to what's required, here's what we recommend. And these things are not hard to put together one time and then have them available. Once again, throw together a Dropbox for your new employees, use an employee onboarding system, whatever it might be, whatever you've got the budget for and whatever type of experience you're trying to create, you want to get these things completed and stored properly. So we recommend an employment agreement. You can make a better one than the Department of Labor has that is a little bit more thorough, that kind of walks through some of the expectations of the role, bullets out the duties that are going to be provided. We want to create a consistency from the time we interview somebody to the time we're measuring their performance, which we're going to talk about in just a couple minutes, that, hey, these same things I told you in the interview process that were part of the role, we know roles change and evolve, but the last thing we want, we see it all the time, is that, hey, I got hired to do X, Y, Z, and that's not at all what I'm actually doing. And it's not in line with my skill set. It's not what I hoped for. And I know in the startup community, this can be challenging because the roles change and evolve daily, but we can still create expectations and talk through things as they change. And employment agreement is a good kickoff to that. Non-compete, definitely recommend if your industry is allowing to this, if you will. That's a whole other subject in itself. Non-disclosure, much the same. Offer letter, definitely recommend, and a handbook. So a lot of people, and I've completely changed my tune on this after having owned a business for 5 years, where before starting the business as an HR professional, I was very anti-handbook. And then I realized, looking back, that I used to look at the handbook all the time when I was an employee. Whenever I wanted to find out what a policy was, or, more information about expectations, I would go to the handbook, and that way I didn't have to bother anybody. I like the self-serve aspect of it. And when we come to that end of employment component of, you have somebody that's not performing up to your standards and you want to terminate them, it becomes infinitely easier if you have policies inside your handbooks related to code of conduct, related to expectations of the workplace, whether that be dress code, and once again, just how you're generally supposed to act. If I can point to those things in the handbook, the department, the unemployment insurance agency, whomever it might be that I've got to put that termination in front of, is much more likely to side with me if I can point them directly to policies internally that somebody has violated during a termination. So definitely recommend a handbook, and they're not that hard to put together with a good HR professional. Attorneys will charge a lot for handbooks. All right, so don't forget, a couple of things as you're getting set up, starting to hire people. We're going to talk about some more best practices related to this too, but these are just the things where all of a sudden the person starts and you're like, oh, geez, how am I going to do this? So how am I going to actually pay them? Yeah, you should either have a software or work with a company that does this professionally. Obviously, I'm partial towards us, but there are other ways to get that done. You need to register for state withholding and unemployment insurance. You can do this if you're in South Carolina, which I assume everybody on this phone call is. On South Carolina Business One Stop, you can do it in one registration, but you're going to need state withholding and unemployment insurance because you're going to have to file, going back to that, I guess going down to this bottom bullet, you're going to have to file state unemployment, state withholding, federal unemployment, federal withholding, at least at a monthly and quarterly and annual basis. So definitely a lot to keep up with if you're not working with somebody who does that professionally. So something that this third bullet, I see people miss all the time. It is something that when we're doing an HR diagnosis with a new client, when we ask this question, I'm always a little bit terrified of the answer, but you need to report your new hires to the state within 20 days, state of South Carolina, to identify if they have any wage garnishments that should be coming out of their check. You need to report them to the IRS within 3 days and their I-9 and E-Verify them. So E-Verify is something that has penalties associated with it, as does the state reporting. So make sure you're reporting the new hire. And these are things that are easy to do, but I always suggest putting together just a quick checklist with all this stuff where you can just check these things off the box each time a new hire starts, or somebody on your team can make sure it's getting done. And then finally, I already hit tax filing. So posting required notices. We are required as small businesses to have labor law posters in place. And also, there's everything from E-Verify to workers' comp. There are some labor law posters that are comprehensive that have every notice that you need. But yeah, you've got to have up the appropriate notices. So I'm going to move forward into sourcing talent, education. So education and training is one of the huge benefits that people need and want, and is probably the most beneficial to the organization, and performance management for the second half of this conversation. But I'm going to stop right here real quick because we're about halfway through, a little over halfway through, and just ask Julia if we had any questions come in that we want to address right now.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much. Great first part of the webinar. I appreciate you going over a lot of that. We right now don't have any questions that have come in so far, but I can see the attendees' minds racing and fingers typing. Please go ahead and type in those questions. They'll pop up on our screen. I will read them aloud, and then Matt will answer them. Matt, I'll let you take a Sip of water while these questions come in. All right. Looks like we have. Okay, so it looks like, Keith, you are raising your hand. So if you want to go ahead and type in the question. Aha, there we go. Thank you. Okay, first question in. Okay, so I think I'm going to try to, piece this question together. But if I'm not asking the question properly, Keith, please write back and let me know. So, is there generally an amount of money that you will need to be making to? That is the end of the question. But I'm assuming he's saying to be hiring people full time versus contract employees.
Yeah, so great question, Keith. And there is definitely, so one of the things that we did, and I don't know if this is the right answer or not, we've made a lot of mistakes, and this may or may not have been one of them, but we hired a lot of part-time specialists in the early days. So for example, we're a payroll and HR outsourcing company. We provide HR support, technology, and payroll processing and services. And so in the early days, before we would have customers that were using us for that full wheel, and there weren't enough customers to do, 100 payrolls. And so it didn't need a full-time person. So we would have a part-time person that was handling payrolls. Same with HR. We'd have a part-time person that was handling the HR component of it. And so we just kind of pieced it together with part-time employees, not contractors, because we were pretty clear that the control, both behavioral and financial, all came back to us. But, and also we were trying to create an environment where we really wanted that culture of team, which you cannot do with contractors because you're going to start to step over some bounds there. But for us, we've got revenue per full-time employee targets that as we got more mature started to make sense. In the early days, it was just like purely looking at the cash flow and going, okay, we got $3,000 in cash flow, like we can afford this person. It was less than scientific in the early days. And sometimes it often is because you have to make those hires to grow. We probably hired earlier than most in the early days because we were fortunate enough to be, have a little bit of runway that we didn't have to bring everything back to the house immediately. So it kind of varies based on the situation without knowing your business, but you can oftentimes find, now we know like what percentage of our revenue should be tied to labor costs, and it gets a little bit easier to go, okay, cool. We've hit this amount of monthly recurring revenue. Here's our current labor cost as a percentage. That validates the opportunity for a new hire. Whereas sometimes we just throw that all out the window and go, hey, everybody's at their breaking point. We got to get this person in right now. And it's going to help us to grow. So it's a little bit of a leap of faith. And, that's the challenge with this stuff. I remember asking Sean Regan, the CEO of Rhythm Link International, here in Columbia. They've been one of the best places to work in South Carolina, one of the fastest growing companies in the country, many years. And he asked me after about 6 months of doing this, hey, how's everything been going? I know you guys just got started. I said, man, it's just so hard. There's just no black or white. There's no right answers. There's just a million different ways to do everything. And he was like, no, you're wrong. There's a million right answers. You just got to pick one and run with it. So that was some paradigm shifting advice for me, and something that we stick to a lot more now is just, okay, this is the path we're going down. Let's get a good plan and let's execute.
Thank you. That was a great answer. I'm just going to add my 2 cents here. One thing that here at SC Launch we find with very successful companies is not only do they have a good HR plan, or they're working towards it, but also they have great resources. Either they have hired a firm to do their accounting and, financial services, but really getting your financials in line at a very early stage is very beneficial, so that you do understand how much money do you need to be making monthly to hire that next person. So the most successful companies that we see have their financials in order. And if they don't, then, we help put them in contact with firms like Elliott Davis, who they can help you if you just say, hey, I've got a cash flow issue, or I need to start fundraising, or I need help with valuation, or, whatever it is. We find that knowing those numbers is really important as well. So Anyways, let's see. I don't have any other questions that have come in right now, but keep your questions coming. Go ahead and type them in if you have them, and then we can read them out loud at the end. But for now, I'm going to hand the mic back over to Matt, and I'll let you take off with the second half of our webinar.
Awesome. And yeah, once again, if you've got questions that you don't feel like posing in front of the group, the URL is down there in the bottom, and it's just matt@ergpayroll.com. So sourcing, I think this is super important. We're going through this right now. It's one of the conversations I have with founders all the time. And they go, man, we just can't find good people. Where do we look? How do we do it? Where should we post jobs? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, 60 to 70% of people are hired via referral. So double down your efforts on your strong referral sources. So we talked about asking your network. It's one of the first questions I ask of somebody when they're having trouble finding a new person is, have you doubled down on your network? Have you reached out, called people, picked up the phone and talked to them? As you're meeting people and seeing them about it, you're talking to your customers, whomever, are you letting them know that you're looking, asking of the great people that they know in their network that might be a fit? These are conversational. They're going to lead to much higher percentage closes, if you will, than your inbound, which comes from, job postings or people hitting your website or whatever. Another option, obviously, is recruiters. But the one caution I'll give here, so I'm a big fan of recruiters, grew up in the industry, we do some recruiting ourselves. Make sure that they see your scorecard or your job description, which we'll talk about in just a moment. They have set foot in your facility or know that everybody works remote, whatever your situation is. Make sure they understand it thoroughly and they meet members of the team if there are other people involved. I'm just seeing more and more sloppy work being done by recruiters as it's so busy right now. They've all got a million open jobs and they're just trying to fill recs. And we're seeing some, once again, the things that used to be commonplace, all those things I just mentioned are getting overlooked in the busyness of today. So, all right, quick tip here. This is something I learned a long time ago, and I executed it to perfection over the last week. So we have got to sell people, especially, once again, tight labor market right now. You're a startup, you're a small business, whatever stage you're at. You've got to sell people on coming to work for you. That's great. Sell them on the blue sky, sell them on the vision. But ultimately, before you make that offer, you need to do what we call a lockdown, and that is to try to talk them out of the job. And that includes mentioning all the things that maybe didn't jive with what they said initially, like, oh, it's a little bit longer of a drive, or, oh, hey, the team's really small. You've mentioned you're a big team player. How are you going to do with only 2 people on your team? And, oh, you're going to be talking to customers a lot more than you used to. How are you going to handle? Really try to talk them out of it, because if you can talk somebody out of a job in 30 minutes prior to hiring them, then they'll be gone in 30 days if you hire them once the reality sets in. So it's counterintuitive. People don't do it enough, but try to talk people out of the job before you make that offer. If you can't talk them out of it, they're a fantastic fit. All right. And so one last point as it relates to the importance of your team. When you look at each of these airlines, they all use the exact same airplanes, the Boeing 777 being shown here. And then obviously there are other models, but the only thing that makes them different are the people that execute their strategy and their day-to-day operations. Your team and your culture are the only thing that are going to help you to stand out. No matter how groundbreaking or unique your idea is, it will go nowhere without the right team in place. So what are you looking for when you look for new teammates? I think one of the biggest challenges we have here is that we put together, got some funky fonts going on there, but we put together job descriptions, and job descriptions are something that you probably have gone out and copy and pasted off the internet somewhere. And, we use the example of the swimmer. So you go out and you find a job description for a swimmer. It says fast, strong swimmer, experienced with all strokes, competitive, team player. What I would encourage you to do is fast forward 1 year from the time that this individual starts and say, what are the measurements? What are the outcomes where if these things happen, I will be ecstatic with this hire? And so a scorecard says, I want you to win 3 or more gold medals in the Olympics. I want you to break Olympic records in at least 60% of races. I want you to win and break records when swimming for team events. Now, this not only gives us a much easier way to set expectations during the hiring process, to find the right person. But we're going to talk about education and training in a little while. And this is the first thing I want to do. I once again, did it with a new hire, where if everything else fell to the wayside, but in a year I look back and they hit these 3 check marks, I would be ecstatic. So now I need to train them. I need to put together a training program each month and over the first 90 days, and then over the first 6 months, and over the first year that leads us to these outcomes. And so it makes everything so much simpler when I start working on more outcome-based rather than these job description type nebulous descriptive statements. And also, we see very quickly what's the difference between a job description and a scorecard. The young lady on the left fit that job description perfectly. She fit every bullet on there. However, she's not going to be able to execute on the outcomes that we have in mind for this role. So definitely be outcome focused, because if you aim at nothing, you're going to hit it every single time. And this is something that is, when we talk about goals and we talk about what we're going to do with our teammates, people will meander. People will do, they will fill the hours in the week. If there's no target, then they will fill them with things that aren't going to bring them closer to the goal, because if there is no goal, you'll hit it every time, right? All right. So one final piece before I talk about a few other things related to onboarding. So this is a whole other session. We've got a ton of stuff related to employee onboarding. Employee onboarding is not orientation. It's not sitting down and filling out these forms. It starts from the time they say yes until a minimum of 90 days into the role, maximum of a year into the role. And you cannot do too much onboarding. Put it to you like this. Twitter says from the time they make an offer to the time an individual sets foot into their desk or steps up to their desk the first day, they have 75 steps in their checklist that need to occur between that handoff. And it is so important, these things that happen in the first days, weeks, months prior to coming on board. Proper communication. Do I know where to go? Do I know who to talk to? Do I know how to get these resources? You just can't do too much. And so make sure you've got a pre-hire checklist. Try to get, once again, you can grab one of those for free on our website, pre-hire checklist. You can grab our ultimate onboarding guide on our website. It's got more checklists, more resources in it. This onboarding is the companies that have a formal onboarding program have 67% higher employee retention than companies without a formal onboarding program. So 67% higher retention, and their productivity skyrockets. Because when I'm onboarding somebody properly, I'm not only getting these tasks done that we've knocked out, I'm also getting them socialized into my organization properly, and I'm getting them trained and educated properly, which is not just important from the perspective of, hey, what can they do for us, but it's one of the most valued benefits, particularly for millennials. So this was a study taken amongst millennials of their most valued benefits. Number one, above cash bonuses, flexible working hours, above all of it, was training and development. Here over and over again. I want to grow. I want to get better. I want this to be, somewhere where I can learn and take that next step. So if you're not doing something, and this is once again overlooked in the startup community because we think, oh, you're growing every day. You learn a lot more about, how to do the job, et cetera. But you need to take a step back, work on training and development from a career perspective, not just a job perspective. So how can you do that? Well, there's a couple of ways, mentors and buddies. So whether you have them internally or externally, we all have networks of people where we can pull mentors into the equation even when they don't work for us. Utilizing outside resources such as, we used lynda.com for years, training platform, got acquired by LinkedIn Learning. There are tons of these online resources that you can go to and subscribe to and get access to. We offer one. It's got more than 600 classes, 600 Skillsoft classes inside the platform. It's just a couple bucks per employee per month. So for a few bucks per employee per month, you can give them access to customer service training, HR training, management training, discrimination training, everything. Really all the stuff the big companies have access to that you don't, only costs you a couple bucks a month. You don't need to build all that out. One of the best practices that I've learned from one of my mentors is to let employees teach. So if you've got a teammate who knows how to do something really well, have him teach the rest of the team how to do it and memorialize that training. Document it, have them write it up, have them record it if you're doing it online virtually for your teams. Things like this are things that are great for us. We would record a webinar like this and be able to reuse it with our internal employees in the future. And ultimately, let your employee take ownership of the plan. This not only gives them accountability and ownership over, hey, what are my goals over the next year of things I want to learn above and beyond what it takes to execute this role, but also it helps save some of that work from you, right? You don't want to sit there and point somebody in the try to keep up with all the different goals and all the different trainings for all of your employees. So find some resources, give your employees the accountability to allow them to manage that plan, and then make sure that you make it part of something that you measure and you stay on top of every single month. It is one of our KPIs. We track every single month, every single week in our team meeting. We ask, did you complete 1 hour of training last week? We want everybody on the team to do a minimum of 52 hours of training per year. Absolute minimum. And so I think that everybody appreciates it, and it helps to keep it top of mind for us. So performance, when we talk about performance management, I go back to, and I'm going to start speeding into the finish here. I go back to the hiring process. You just have to have a process. So if you've grabbed a couple performance review templates offline, use them, be consistent. So determine what your pacing is. Annual performance reviews are a total waste of time if not supplemented by consistent, either monthly or quarterly performance-related conversations. Recency bias takes over. It's too much time between conversations. You forget everything that happened. Have consistent coaching and performance-related conversations that are also taking a step back. Once again, focusing on the career, focusing on the individual, not just a task at hand, right? So frequency. The earlier you establish that performance-related conversations are going to be part of working at your organization, the better off you're going to be and the more open dialogue you're going to have. And then ultimately make sure that you are having performance-related conversations. When you do sit down and have those formalized conversations, you're evaluating their execution of the role, not the person. When we're conducting a performance review, we are saying, did you check those boxes on those outcomes? Not do I like you, not are you a nice, it's not about the person, it's about the role. Once again, I'll throw some performance review templates in that Dropbox as well. Here's the biggest thing, going back to that comment about Sean Regan at Rhythm Link International. He's been a great mentor without having to have a million conversations because I just watch him. I talk to him every now and then. I steal things that they do regularly because they're the type of organization I want to create. And there are a lot of people out there where I can go out there and I don't have to just copy things and tweak them. I just steal them, right? Because they already work. Going back to that employee owns the education program. Yeah, that came from Tom Petras at Balk Knight, Petras and Stormer. I take these things from other organizations and make them their own. I often joke, I'm like, the book is just a collection of things that I stole from other people because that's all life is, right? We steal knowledge from everywhere we can get it. So go out and steal good HR practices from other organizations. And one of the ones I like to steal from a lot is SaaS because Dr. Goodnight knows that 95% of your assets drive out that gate every evening. Your human capital and how you manage your human capital and how you treat your team is going to dictate and manage the success of your organization. And if you don't truly believe that, and if you're just in it to make a buck and you're just in it because you think you're smarter than everybody else, and then it's going to be a real struggle for you and your company. So I'm going to end there. I love that you all jumped on for this and that you've made HR a priority inside your organization. I'm once again happy to connect, answer any questions. If you ever should have any needs related to payroll, human resources, we're happy to help you in any way we can. You can check out our website. We do offer a free HR diagnosis where we go through everything that you're currently doing related to HR from pre-hire to post-termination and identify where we can help you to improve those processes, or if you're just getting started, then we basically have an HR department in a box where you can just launch it with a click of a button instead of having to create it all yourself. So, Julia, I'm incredibly grateful that you would entrust me to share some content today. And if there are any other questions, I'm happy to take them. If not, I appreciate the time.
Matt, thank you so much. I just want to echo what he just said about this free HR diagnosis. You have to take him up on it. I mean, this is great, right? This is amazing. It's free. They'll just dive in. Afterwards, they can help you figure out the right, combination of what you need afterwards or whatever it is. So I do see a couple questions that have come in, so I'm going to hop over to that. Give me just a second. Sorry. It's just someone saying, thank you so much, Matt, for your time. One of our other resource partners. So thank you, Jerry. I appreciate you being on. Let's see if, all right, I don't think I see any other questions. But I am going to email a link to this presentation to everybody that registered and that was here on the call. And then you can just click on that, and you can also see all the other webinars that we have done in the past and a link to future webinars. Matt, I just want to say thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your candid, HR advice. So thank you so much, and thank you to everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye.